Hey everyone, this is Andy Polk.
And this is Ben Shaw.
And this is BBJ, the Bathwater and the Baby Jesus podcast. Today we're doing things a little bit different. We're going to listen to an audio clip between Richard Nixon and Billy Graham, and then have a conversation about what we do with the clip and what we do especially with religious leaders when they fail.
Okay, so today we're going to do something a little different than our usual format, if we have, in fact, established a format after 4 episodes. But I was scrolling Twitter the other day, as I do from time to time, which, you know, it's
a dangerous thing.
Take that for what it is. It's usually my source of sports information more than anything. But I also follow some other podcasts and some theologians and folks who put their stuff out there. And a group called the New Evangelicals, which is a podcast and group that deals with a lot of post-evangelical topics, put out this tweet of a conversation, audio recording of a conversation between Richard Nixon and Billy Graham that was recorded in the Oval Office in 1972. And I listened to it, and my immediate reaction was to send it directly to Andy. And I was like, we should talk about this. I think there's several points of conversation that will kind of spring from it. But before we get into that, we're actually going to just play that audio clip for you all. And then we will talk about it after that.
You see, the Bible makes a distinction, Mr. President, between two groups of Jews. One is called the synagogue of Satan. There are two different kinds. There are those people in the latter days it's called the remnant of God's people, which will be Jewish people. And then there's the synagogue of Satan. And nearly all of your religious deceptions in the latter days, what the Bible speaks, latter days could be 1,000 years, what they call the synagogue of Satan. In other words, they are energized by a supernatural power called the devil. This is what the Bible teaches, whether you believe it or don't believe it. This is the biblical teaching, and this is what I believe. And I believe that they have a strange brilliance about them. They're smart. And they are energized, in my judgment, by a supernatural power.
Well, also they do something else. They're not inspired.
And you see, of course, Hitler didn't. They had a stranglehold on Germany, on the banking of Germany, on everything in Germany, and the media. They had the whole thing, you see. But he went about it wrong. But this stranglehold has got to be broken, or this country is going to go down the drain.
You believe that?
Yes, sir.
I can't ever say it. But I believe it.
No, but if you get elected the second time, we might be able to do something.
All right.
Wow, there you go.
So obviously the audio quality is really bad. We get that, and I'm going to put a link to the tweet, which has that audio transcribed as it's playing, and so you can actually kind of see that a little bit better. But we're going to talk about it, and then I'm also going to put, this was pulled from an 1.5 hour long conversation that was had in the White House Oval Office in 1972. There is a link to the Richard Nixon archives, which has the full audio file. So just to kind of put that out there if you want to go listen to the whole conversation. There was several other people in the room. I think there's like 3 or 4 other folks that were in there, just weren't speaking at that time. So kind of just to let y'all know, you can certainly go check that out. In fact, I encourage you to do so. So anyway, I say all that, and so as we were sitting here re-listening to this, I don't know that we had actually listened to the whole thing while we were in the same room together, and it's tough for me to get through that. There's so much to unpack. First of all, to hear who I can only describe as the most influential Christian leader of my generation. And the
previous generation,
and my
least,
parents'
sure.
generation, speak like that is to a president, United States president. It was, I mean, I had already kind of understood and realized there was lots of problems with Billy Graham up to this point, and a lot of this stuff is fairly new to me as far as just working through what it means to understand the Bible and all this stuff. I mean, the term deconstruction's happened, all this, but I mean, it's not a new, or it is a new thing for me. So there are still elements of the foundation of my childhood upbringing that are still there. Yeah. And Billy Graham was definitely one of those pillars of that foundation.
Did you ever get to go to any crusades?
I did.
Did you see him?
Yeah, I went to the one in we're in Tennessee, and he came to Nashville to the it was Adelphia Coliseum at the times where the Tennessee Titans played.
We were there together, I bet.
Yeah.
I was there
honestly
as well.
went because DC Talk was playing at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
They were my favorite
You got to have your priorities straight. That's right.
Hey, look, you know, I mean, again, we've established already, I'm a musician and I get down with the music. So, yeah, I mean, and that was... that was an experience, one of the things that this is already an aside that I always found interesting about growing up was I felt like you were required to get saved a lot.
Yeah.
But then you're told that once you're saved, you're good.
Yeah, but then you need to, you got to recommit. You backslid. You got to come through, and let's have revivals.
That's
it does. Yeah.
Anyway, that's beside the point. I just remember that happening en masse, and I'm like, how are all these people who are at this Billy Graham crusade not already saved? Yeah, but that's a whole other thing. So to hear that conversation, it's it's something. It's something. Yeah. So let's break down kind of 2 or 3 elements in there and then talk about them. First of all, a Christian leader speaking about an evil cabal of Jewish smart people. Boy, that's rough. Yeah. So give us a little bit of history about that line of thinking with the he mentions the remnant. The Jews or
the synagogue of Satan. Yes, what's happening with So there, I mean, honestly, it's the history of anti-Semitism in Christianity is the history of Christianity from about, maybe the 2nd century on. The early Christian community in the first century to century and a half, the prevalent question that motivated much of everything was, do you have to become a Jew to become a Christian? Which sounds weird now, but is a very reasonable question since Jesus was a Jew and the early Christian leaders were all Jews, and the understanding was this is true Judaism, right? This is the Jewish Messiah that comes. We properly understand this now, right? They thought afterwards, and
I think
so
Paul spent a lot of his ministry trying to kind of
the very fact that Paul was talking to Gentiles was the huge thing, right? And we have this multiple times in Scripture, 2 different versions of it, really, of Acts, and then Paul talking about it, of him and Peter get in this fight, and he goes through all this that you're not allowed to, and then you can, and what they do with it. But that it didn't solve it, right? This quote unquote Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15. The narrative acts as if, well, then they just decided and it was settled. Well, clearly it wasn't, because everything Paul writes and everything we know of Christian history. What he's talking about specifically there, the synagogue of Satan, is it comes from Revelation at the beginning of the book of Revelation, about they claim to be Jews, but they're not really Jews, is where it comes from, and they're persecuting Christians, and this is part of this apocalyptic narrative. And that has been used quite a lot, right, throughout Christian history for Christians to persecute Jews. Just blatant anti-Semitism of...
Just real fast, if you hear random knocking and banging noises, we are recording this in my office, and there are other things that happen in the building that are sometimes very loud.
Construction zone, as it comes through.
So sorry about that, folks. But just we're not being
if you
shot
hear
at.
That's why. Everything's okay.
So everything's fine.
Yeah, we both look at each other like, oh, they may misinterpret that sound.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism was a core. The idea was, would the Jews kill Jesus? Right, the Jews killed Jewish Jesus, and they're all Jews, right? So it's irrational in large measure,
sure,
but it's a matter of this has been a long-standing understanding in the Western world of this idea of a cabal of Jews that are secretly in charge of things, and we got to take care of them. I mean, the first crusade, we think of the Crusades, right, of going back and retaking Jerusalem and fighting against Muslims, and there's all this. The first crusade, primarily at the beginning, just marched through Europe and massacred Jews, European Jews, massacred Jews.
Yeah.
Men, women, children, and this was the holy work of God retaking everything. Right, Jews are expelled from Spain, right, which was part of that Catherine, Ferdinand and Isabella, right, that they send Christopher Columbus through this. He goes through, and what's happening in Portugal and Spain. This is the expulsion of the Jews happens 1492. When Columbus sailed the ocean blue. You got to get them out. And now that the Inquisition has been successful, now that all of the Jews are out, well, now we can start spreading the word of God throughout the world. Anti-Semitism has been at the core of all of this, and it's often linked, as Graham did, with these ideas of prophecy. And right, here's your $5 fancy word for the day: eschatology, the study of the end times. Use that in casual conversation, folks.
That's right.
These eschatological understandings, the way the world ends and how it is, and it's the Jews. And you hear this today. You can go into churches who talk about it. It is there. We love the Jews. We support Israel, but if you get down to any details, it's supporting Israel because all the Jews have to go back to Israel for Jesus to come back. And then there's going to be a massive Holocaust, and then they don't really understand. And then it is not supporting Israel as Jews, as human beings in the way often. Right. So it's disturbing. And the most disturbing part for me there is
when Richard Nixon says, because they're smart.
No, yes. Well, there's whole other Richard Nixon stuff we get into. Is when Graham said, Hitler was right that they really were controlling Germany and they really did have the banking system. He didn't do it the right way, but we've got to make sure we've got to cut the ties that they have in our country. Yeah. Like, how do you casually go over, Hitler was right about the Jews. He didn't do it right, but you do have to get rid of them.
Yeah. My jaw literally hit the floor.
Yeah, I mean, it's inexcusable. I know that people have loved Graham. We both did. Like, this is part of the point of what it is. We understood the Graham Crusades, that this was an integral part of the way we understood evangelicalism in the world.
And I imagine that lots of people to this day still find great meaning in his experiences with his ministry, and that's fine. But
that
we have to acknowledge.
You got to acknowledge the reality.
We have to acknowledge the reality of what is happening here, and it really makes me question all the motivations behind his whole ministry.
Yeah.
If this is 1972, I mean, his ministry started in the 50s, I think, right?
40s, 50s. He did some stuff in World War II, but his really takeoff was in the 50s.
Okay, so
worldwide campaigns.
Yeah, and a lot of that, you look at the American history at that time, right? We're post-war era. We're coming through the 50s, the American dream mentality, and so we are trying to build this country up, and Graham is just right there with it in that process of building this ideal scenario, which come to find out, his ideal scenario involves not having the Jewish people around.
Yeah.
Which is just, man, that just really rocks me to the core.
And there's more connected to this with Graham that has come out partly since he died. Right, and this part of why we have these tapes, right? So this was some background. Nixon had a secret recording system. If you don't remember Watergate, a lot of people maybe who are listening were not born, so they don't remember Watergate. But he had a secret recording system used primarily for blackmail. And then this came out through the Watergate investigations. It went all the way to Supreme Court. He claimed executive privilege. And the Supreme Court case, Nixon v. United States. You're in a problem when the Supreme Court case is President of the United States v. United States. Said, well, there is such a thing as executive privilege, but not when it's involving a legitimate criminal investigation. And this was. So you got to turn them all over. And so that's why we have a lot of these.
Yeah.
But
And my understanding was that this one was heavily
it was
censored until after Billy Graham passed.
Yeah, through the National Archives and through the Nixon Foundation to library. Yeah, there are parts of these that were sensitive because of people, and it was honestly it's political, of course.
Sure.
But yeah, there were, as you said, Graham was a part of this, and we want you to understand this is not. We aren't here to. This is an episode bashing Billy Graham. That's not what it is. It is wrestling with what happens when you have these religious leaders who you look up to, who you admire, and you find out it's not just they're imperfect, but there is some reprehensible stuff that's a part of this.
Yeah. So let me ask the question. I told Andy before we got started today, he's like, I'm going to have lots of questions. So get ready.
Yeah.
Because this is definitely going to be more in line with your area of expertise. Tell me where the theological idea comes from that he's referencing. Is this all coming out of Revelation? Because he says in the latter days. He mentions the latter days, and he says, and the Bible says it's 1,000 years. And he said, this is biblical teaching. This is what the Bible says. And it's like, well,
does it? Yeah,
it doesn't actually say that literally. First of all, so you're interpreting it, but then. So anyway, tell me
background. Yeah, so the quick background of this, what he is, you're going to get a few fancy words today. I mean, we'll factor in inflation and see how much these are worth. I'll pay you after we're done. This is technically a part of what we call dispensational eschatology. If you want some more fancy ones, it's pre-tribulational, premillennial dispensational eschatology.
All right,
which just flows off the tongue.
How many hyphens?
And if you're still listening right now after saying those 4 ridiculous big words in a row, so it's very popular today. Most people who know this, it's very possible that you know this from your churches. It is an understanding that was really popularized in the 19th century by what's called the Schofield Reference Bible. John Nelson Darby tours. These were British guys who came to the U.S. and toured around too. There was trying to figure out biblical prophecy. The world was changing, both in America in the lead up to the Civil War, and then particularly as it took off in the late 19th century. The beginnings of urbanization, industrialization. That's right. Yeah. Mass poverty that Americans had never seen before. Most of the West it wasn't possible beforehand. So what do we do? What's a Christian response to this? And one great American theme is we are in the end days. There's not a lot of people say American history has always been. There's very little you can fill in that's been consistently true. One is America has been pretty consistently religious, more religious than most Western nations, and therefore every generation believes they are the last generation. Of course, we're special. Of course, we look at it. So this was a big understanding of end times prophecy. The dispensations come to an idea that there were different ways through time, through the world history, that God has interacted with the world. Right, so the antediluvian time. Right, so there's the time of Eden. And then the time of the patriarchs, right? The antediluvian time, then the time of the patriarchs, and the time of the judges, and then you have the kingdom, right? So it goes through all this. It's very complicated, and there's no way. There are fantastic charts that are made of this that are just like illuminated manuscripts. But what it comes down to is trying to read the proverbial, perhaps biblical tea leaves in a very similar way. As you said, there's like the synagogue of Satan. He's like, well, this is just biblical. It's there. Well, it's from like the first part of Revelation, which is a part of apocryphal literature that we understand was a genre that they use at different times. But you take and you pull from these, and what you develop is a very complicated schema that says these are the things that indicate that the world is ending.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, Revelation was written, and really a lot of the New Testament writings were written in a culture that believed that they were in the end times. Correct?
Oh, well, this is the consistent thing, certainly of the first generation of Christians, right? I mean, you get this throughout the Bible that we don't usually talk about. But but they very much so believe this was the end times, right? Jesus is coming back. Jesus is coming back now, right? And part of this comes from the Gospels, or at least in the synoptic tradition, right? I tell you, this generation will not pass until they see me come in the glory, right? And you look at Peter's sermon at Pentecost. It is an apocryphal sermon. What is happening right here is all these people are speaking these languages that they haven't learned and everyone's understanding. That's because God is pouring out God's Spirit on the earth, the Holy Spirit, and he does that at the end days. But this is the end times, folks. Yeah. Paul says, don't get married. We don't do this one in Corinthians, right? I mean, if you need to get married, like get married, but like it's pretty much a waste of time because Jesus is coming back tomorrow. And if not tomorrow, probably next week. Right. And being married takes a lot of time. Why don't you just, live out the gospel on earth and then it's all going to end, so it's okay. Yeah, so they definitely believed this. The apocryphal writings seem to be, there's debate over this in the literature.
Let's define the word apocryphal.
Apocryphal, this is the end time. So there's part of it that is, you can talk the apocrypha, the ones that are outside of the canon. When we talk about apocryphal language, it is this kind of mystical, supernatural. These are the things happening. Daniel, Ezekiel, right? There are portions of this type of literature. It's like a genre style.
Okay.
That takes these kind of mythological type of symbols to explain what's really happening, usually in the day and time. That's what it is.
Right.
And our best understanding really of Revelation is
Andy,
that too.
Are you telling me that the Bible was written to a certain
almost,
group of people at a certain specific time?
In their day and time. And Wow. And so when we come up with things that they could never have understood, we're probably just being very arrogant and self-centered. And our understanding of Revelation is it was late, at least late first century, if not early second century. And it's mostly dealing with Rome. It's explaining what Rome is and what they're doing and how it's happening with the persecution and why, in the end, God wins. That's what Revelation is.
They're trying to justify the reason for keeping their faith in that all this judgment's going to rain down on the oppressors that are keeping us down.
We thought it's going to happen. You know what? God still wins. It's going to work, and it happens. And even in ways that in this kind of dispensational, the popularized thing that's really popular in these churches now, doesn't really actually hold with a lot of biblical stuff. Somewhat not surprisingly, really, right? There's going to be the great battle that comes at the end, and you could in actually the term when that happens, God just goes and you're done. Like there's no actual battle. They all amass against God, and then God says, and that's it. But that doesn't work well with things. So this is part of what it is, and part of this understanding popularized what most listeners, some listeners might understand. At one point, the best-selling series in American history, Left Behind. Yeah. Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Tim LaHaye, a pastor, Jerry Jenkins, a writer, and Tim
LaHaye
LaHaye
wrote all the stuff
from those books. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's the part that here is so difficult. Put all cards on the table. I think this Left Behind dispensational theology, I think it doesn't square with the biblical tradition. It doesn't square with Christian history. I don't believe it, et cetera, et cetera. But the real problem of it all is that there's a lot of other stuff that's tacked onto this. Yeah. With most of the time, it is really a very complicated understanding of why we are right and privileged and good, and we are the best, and God's going to destroy all those others. And we have the secret knowledge that understands what's really happening. And anti-Semitism is almost always at the heart of it. Often now, xenophobia, racism, misogynism often become entwined in all of this together. And quite frankly, you see that explicitly with Graham here.
Yeah.
So for you just said, right, you read the Left Behind series, you had this. What was your experience with just that part, this kind of dispensational end of the world stuff?
So, we were it wasn't quite fire and brimstone. Yeah. I would say a lot more keeping yourself out of hell rather than keeping yourself ready for the rapture. But it was certainly a part of it. You keep your house in order because Jesus could come back at any time. And that was kind of the language and idea that, he's coming. It could be tomorrow. Yeah. There was never an attempt to say when. right? That, at least not that I remember. But it was always implied that it was anytime,
Why don't you explain the rapture? You use those terms we need to define for those who are not familiar with them, perhaps.
Okay, so and this is my understanding.
Yeah, that's fine. Sure.
So this will be a non-theological description of the rapture, but basically, Jesus says he's coming back, right, to raise the dead. So all the souls of all the Christians who have been saved, and then the souls of the Christians who have been saved, which prayed that sinner's prayer, Jesus comes and lifts them up, takes them all back into heaven with him. It creates a period of dystopian, turmoil where there's an opportunity for people to, get saved again.
Or tribulation, usually 7 years that people are there. Yeah.
So there's this time frame, and then there's all kinds of, signs and symbols that are talked about, the end times, the Antichrist. A lot of this language is, and a lot of that theology that I got that understanding came from those books.
Left Behind. That's right. Yep.
And they came, and in fact, I saw somebody reference in a tweet and be like, called somebody a Nikolai Carpathia, which was the name of the Antichrist character.
Antichrist, yeah. And
I was like, oh my gosh, that's really it's ingrained.
Yeah.
But so that's my uneducated description of the rapture.
That is an educated description of the rapture, right? That's where it comes. And this is usually we're the special ones, right? I cannot wait for the rapture because we're the ones who are right, and Jesus is going to take us up, and then, you people, get ready for the tribulation.
I mean, I remember laying in bed thinking at night, be like, would my clothes go with me? Mm-hmm. That's how much I actually heard referenced on a podcast I was listening to. I listen to a lot of podcasts, in case you haven't picked up on that. A lot of my source of information is from audio formats of other people talking. But it was a guy that was interviewing an author, and she was talking about her husband, who is a pastor, and was meeting with a student whose mom kept wanting them to come because she was having, come to find out after 5 or 6 meetings, she was having night terrors about the rapture, about being left behind and all of her family going up and her being left. And this is like a, 8-9-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And that was a real fear that she had. So, I mean, that's a real fear that is definitely not shied away from in the
That's right. Yeah. It is pervasive and not accidentally. That there's a part of this that that's to be afraid, and you need to get your life right so that you're not left behind and you can go through.
Which I think is a really unhelpful and almost, I guess, unhealthy way to approach Christianity. But that's kind of another conversation we can have at another time, right? But I think that's central to this, right? Your motivation is to get saved, not to live the gospel on earth, right? That there's that changes how you go. But this is how it becomes all muddied up, right? Some listeners may have experiences with this, either left behind or Sunday school, or you were raised with it or heard from the pulpit, or you just really loved that. What they made the movies from this. They made one. Nick Cage.
That was the remake, though. The original was the guy from not
from
Full House. No, it wasn't Full House. It was another one. What is his name?
Kirk Cameron.
Kirk Cameron. Thank you, because there were people listening to this who wanted to.
Aren't they related?
Seem like similar.
Candace Cameron.
Yes, Candace Cameron. That's where it is. Yeah,
we got there.
Yeah, he was there. Who is an evangelical Christian and believes this. I think they made 2, maybe 3. They were truly horrible, in my opinion, movies.
I can honestly and proudly say I never watched.
Oh, you should. I would say they're so bad they're entertaining. You just read the story. You knew it. That's right. That's right. The literati of Left Behind.
I've never seen a movie that I had also read the book, with the exception of Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
I'm going to throw that in there.
There you go.
I liked a lot. So
I worry about all this. I worry about it. I don't think it's bad, right? This is not if you're from a tradition or a congregation, or your parents or someone, they're really into biblical prophecy and going. It's not like an inherently bad or unhealthy thing. I don't believe that, but it is a schema that is very ripe for a lot of unhealthy stuff. If nothing else, it is an exclusive club, right?
Yeah.
Not just in terms of Christianity, of what you find truth and what you have, right? There's some exclusivity there in different veins of Christianity that we can talk about perhaps later on. But this one is very much so, you're the good ones, right? You are taken up, you are raptured, the others are left behind.
Yeah.
And the interpretations are just so...
And I did
so broad.
I did grow up thinking that I was a part of the only club that was going.
Yes.
And that all the other Christian clubs,
the supposed Christian ones, are going to find out.
They weren't.
Yeah, but we need to pray Jesus over them and make sure. Hopefully, in the tribulation, when the Antichrist rises in the UN with the European Union of 13 and Reagan or Gorbachev,
I remember thinking that my friends were going to be left behind.
Yeah. It becomes ingrained. We didn't, in my tradition, I've studied this professionally, but growing up, my tradition was generally, the fancy term is amillennial. And the millennium, by the way, is, so the basic storyline is, some point, the world's getting worse and worse and worse. And some point, God's just like, enough, I'm done with this. So sends Jesus down. Jesus takes all the good Christians. There's 7 years. It gets super crazy. The Antichrist rises up and establishes a temple in Jerusalem and blah, 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 blah. But
everybody gets barcodes on the back of their
poured
head.
Off. That's right. 666, all this stuff. So, but some people may come to God in this time when it all rains. And then at the end of that, you have the grand battle of Armageddon, which again, biblically is God being like, and you're wiped out. But becomes far more, romanticized or mythologized in generally these schemes, the Megiddo and all this happens. But at that point, then the rapture comes, which is the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. And then after that, Satan / one of the beasts is let out from the fire, and then it's the final judgment, and then it's all heaven, right? It's a long road to heaven, basically.
Yeah.
My tradition was like, none of that, just heaven. Like, God's going to come back, or Jesus is going to come back. It's the end of everything. There's the sorting, the final judgment. That's it.
Right.
But even that was ingrained so much that, I remember distinctly when I was a kid, if there was like a really bad thunderstorm, legitimately, fully, I thought, there's a chance this is it. Maybe this is it. This sounds like what it would sound like if Jesus is coming back from the clouds and ending the stuff. Yeah, it makes sense.
Coming on the clouds with fire.
The way that this happens is the part that bothers me. It's not a blanket statement. It's just from my experience.
Sure.
The communities who are really into this are really unhealthy.
Yeah.
From my experience. I'm not saying there aren't those who are kind and compassionate humans who go around. And I think usually in these communities there is kindness and compassion, but it seems to be very specific to some people and very good about othering and being very afraid of those other people and how it works. And that's the part that worries me. So that part wasn't surprising to me, that he is combining this kind of dispensational left behind stuff with, oh my goodness, Hitler was right. He went about it in a wrong way.
Those Jews are smart.
But we got to do it better.
They got us under their thumb.
Yeah. It's it's horrendous. It's disturbing. It's inexcusable. And this is right. This may be another baby bathwater thing, but I think it's more difficult.
Sure.
It's not necessarily that if you then you've read Left Behind and you are awaiting we're not saying if you are awaiting the rapture, you are an anti-Semite or you're a racist or you're a misogynist. Of course not. But what I am explicitly saying is that scheme is very ripe and very inviting and very open to anti-Semitism and racism and xenophobia.
Right. Because it's all formed around the structure that you're looking out for other people who are going to be bringing these bad things to you.
Who are bad and worse. Yes, that's right. Yeah. And all this is happening, and it's a weird dynamic of you almost celebrate these horrible things because it means Jesus is coming back for me. That's good. Yeah. But, oh, look at this. But it's the self-righteousness that immediately comes out of this.
Yeah.
It reeks continuously of self-righteousness. It's really problematic in how it can, it's beyond problematic of itself, right?
Sure.
It's deplorable, I would say, but it's problematic in that how do you untangle that from the gospel and the Christian message and how it goes when you have been brought up in this idea that almost that's what it is, right? You still be clean, you still be good, you go to church, but somehow the motivating impulse is really figuring out the signs and reading through, and we care about Israel, but usually it's Israel who only votes a certain way or not the bad ones, right? Is explicitly what Graham was saying. There's some good ones and bad. Some of them are okay. You got to watch out for those other ones. They're bad. Yeah. Oh, and man.
What makes a good Jew versus a bad Jew?
Yeah.
The one that usually disagrees with me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, whether or not they agree with us.
That's the definition.
That's it.
That's it.
Yep.
That is.
And which is still essentially dehumanizing, right?
For sure.
You can't.
Well, it is.
It's passive. It is absolutely dehumanizing, right? Not people unto themselves. It is pawns in this large game. Anything that makes it easier to dehumanize people, I would say, is something we need to throw out.
Absolutely.
And so it's a problem. But there's another part of this that comes that we started with. It's the fact that Billy Graham was saying all this.
Yeah. Who is this? And this is obviously, and I think I'm pretty sure that he says this, and it might actually be Nixon saying this, but he says, "I can't say this, but I agree with you."
Yeah, it was Nixon who said that.
That was Nixon who said that.
Yeah.
Which,
I can't say this out loud, of course, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. That sounds right.
And so what that tells me is that all the stuff on the surface just kind of seems superfluous at this point, right? It's not.
Yeah.
It's not real. It's not what was supposed to be, good fruit or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever term you want to throw out there.
You judge by the fruits, sure.
Yeah. It's kind of rotten on the inside, though. Which just really, I don't.
I think that's it, right? This is bathwater Jesus stuff. It is. Can you still take from Graham, or let's broaden it out, right? I think this is a problem that people have, that we've had in our experiences. A lot of people who are on the fringes of the church, have left Christianity, are thinking about it and unsure, right? All of this. Sometimes it's Christianity as a whole, sometimes it's church, sometimes it's worship, sometimes it is a religious leader who's supposed to be a great man or woman of God, and let's be honest, it is most often a man, both because of patriarchy in the church and because of the world that we live in.
Which is where patriarchy in the church came from.
That's exactly right, yeah. And so what happens when there's a man of God who you respect and has helped you through, and then you find out, as we talked about on a previous episode, is having multiple affairs that has happened in places, or is happened in many denominations and sects. There's been rampant sexual abuse, including of minors, of women abuse under the care, of all this, and it's been swept under the rug. Even that, maybe the leader wasn't the one who did this. So often it is, but this is again my danger of institutional church. If it's a movement that is not trying to do good in the world, but a thing that must exist for there to be good in the world, I easily can justify, well, that's a bad thing and we don't like it. Of course we don't condone that. But if it gets out, we won't exist. And if we don't exist, we can't do any good. And so, what happens when these great spiritual leaders, are made,
which is just not.
How do you maintain the whole thing works when this person who's supposed to be the exemplar of it is seems abominable to you? Yeah,
when in reality, what should happen is that immediately you tear it all down and just start over.
If you believe, my response is yes. If you believe in it, what you must do, the thing that is at the height of your mind is, how could this possibly happen in this community that we have? You will never sweep it under the rug. You will apologize. You will try to find help for those victims. You will, if it's possible, after the victims have been protected, that you concentrate on their healing. We believe in the Christian tradition, yes, there is redemption, but the redemption is not you go and do a tour and you come back and found another church.
Yeah, it's not restoration.
It is not. Yes, that's exactly right.
Redemption,
you're loved by God, you come is not the same thing of you get the power and prestige back.
Right.
You can't. It's
which
not
is
healthy.
unfortunately what we're seeing
Usually
right now.
what happens.
I mean, you're seeing it with Mark Driscoll from Mars Hill and that whole thing, and then he's founded another church in Arizona. Brian Houston with Hillsong right now. He's going around speaking to churches here in the States who are inviting him to come speak. And
because all you have to do is change that story, right? Well, I did. You know what? But God forgives us. Isn't it great what God has done? But that's not accountability. That's not responsibility. It's just moving. Yeah. So what it's the game. It's the great game.
Yeah.
But it is easy, right? Too much when I've brought this up even growing up that we've talked about these experiences. When I say, but that's not true. That's not right. What it is, it becomes a thing of, but those are like, it's the bad apples thing. It's the easiest thing that we see, right, in these discussions of police and everything. It's a bad apple. That has nothing to do with the church. You know what? We're all imperfect and we mess up at a church. But there's a part that is rational to saying, but if the church allows and somehow perpetuates that, maybe the whole thing is rotten.
Yeah.
My experience says no. Yeah. Except maybe that tree. This is the problem. Christianity as a whole, no, I've seen too many communities, too many people who are loving and compassionate and open and admittedly imperfect and moving through. But I've seen some communities that I say, I not every human being who walks in the doors, but the institution, it's a rotten tree.
Yeah.
And it keeps producing rotten fruit.
Yeah.
And I don't think we sweep that under the rug either. I don't think we pretend that away. But man, it's hard, especially when it's not Billy Graham, but it's your preacher you've been with for 10 years or you grew up with, and then, but having an affair with, an elder's wife or the deacons, like this, wait, what? Everything you've taught, you don't seem to live.
Yeah.
So what does any of this matter? Does any of this matter?
It seems like time after time after time, the excuse is given, I made a mistake, but we believe in forgiveness, so you should forgive me and let's move forward.
That's right.
And when in reality, it should be like, yes, I made a mistake. I should not be leading you anymore. I'm going to step down.
I can't.
It's
I
never
have
going
to find some way to.
Yeah. No, that's not fair. I won't say it never.
Yeah, there's sometimes it does. Yes.
But
and then the question is, when does the redemption tour start? Somehow becomes.
If it were up to me, never.
Yeah.
I don't.
If it's involving children, never.
Yeah,
period. You can't ever have that person around children.
That may be harsh. And that's how I feel.
Yeah.
I don't. I have a big problem with giving people an authority over other people whenever they have proven
when they have abused that authority
that they cannot be trusted with it. And so I don't know that there is a way to earn it back. And that's just my loss. Like, I will forgive you.
Yeah,
and that's
try to
fine.
Find some way that there can be. Yeah,
but I'm not going to trust you again.
This is the reality of this is the thing that we talk about that we want to admit we don't have it all figured out because we live in a messy, broken world. Yeah. Maybe that's not right, and there's certain situations that can be. But from best that we can, I agree with you. Best I can see. In the way that the world functions, no, that person does not and should not have authority anymore. Certainly not religious, spiritual authority.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they can't go to church. It doesn't mean God doesn't love them. It doesn't mean God cannot redeem them in some way.
Yeah. But instead, what you see
are consequences.
Yeah. Instead, what you see is I saw a video of a guy who had an affair, or there was some. It's actually still all happening right now, and I'm not going to name names because I honestly just don't remember the names. But he got to control his own narrative, right? Like he got into trouble, and there was this quote unquote long investigation. But he was the one who got to tell the church about what this other person did and what he did.
In the situation, we all make mistakes.
He got a standing ovation after it was done.
Yeah.
He got a standing ovation. I'm just like, Why is he the one? He should, the person who has committed the whatever, you want to call it, sin, infraction, abuse.
I mean, it depends on the circumstances.
Should not be the one who is telling the people that they lead about it, because unless it's saying, I'm sorry, I've made a mistake, I'm stepping down, and you won't see me again. Which, again, I think this all goes back to that conversation we had before about the church and the institution of the church. And if this person is in this type of leadership position, they've probably already made the justification to themselves that, well, look at all this good that I am doing, so they can forgive me for this one thing, so that I can keep doing this good, and we can keep doing this good, and it's all for the greater good.
And in those situations, right, we have to admit there is a difference in terms of. Even this is difficult to say, right? There is a difference between the anti-Semitic language and what we've seen, say in the Catholic Church or the Southern Baptist Convention, that's come out of rampant abuse, physical, sexual abuse of minors, of authority figures on those who came to them for counseling, and then manipulated or raped and then suddenly the narrative you move them over, and that's going to stain the church, and you can't. So there are differences in the way that different people can fail.
Sure.
But it's still failing, and there are times that goes both ways. If there are some things that you say this and it was wrong, you shouldn't have said that. I think it indicates something that's wrong in your worldview, right? Quote unquote, in your heart, of the way you do, and you abusing your authority and your power to manipulate and abuse another human being. God still loves you. God, I don't like that. I believe God still loves you. I believe that you can find redemption. I will do everything in my power to make sure that you never have that authority again, so you never have the possibility to abuse it. And I am significantly more concerned about the health and right living of the person who was abused, more than the abuser. And somehow this happens. And I do not think it's coincidental that most often this is men as the abusers and women as the abused, and we are concerned about the men and how they go and the leadership and it has, right? Those are entwined together in these
victims are ostracized. They are shunned and pushed away and made to be less than when they're the ones who were abused.
Should be rallied around and supported and taken care of. And
you're right. I mean, just historically looking at the facts, it's much more heavily leaning men abusing women. And a lot of that is, again, we've said already, the structure of patriarchy in the church, which is a whole nother podcast. But that leads to this setting up this scenario where women are coming to men for spiritual counseling, and then speaking of the Billy Graham rule, that's certainly something that is still very prevalent in our society.
And this, so let's define that in case you don't know. This is a famous thing that Billy Graham. Some have talked about it afterwards, not technically in the same way that Graham did, but this was the rule within the campaign, certainly for Graham, that Graham would never be alone with another woman other than his wife. And their dual purpose of this. His primary purpose was they thought about all his enemies would basically get some woman to, in the way they described it, you go to your hotel room and you walk in, you close the door, and out pops a naked woman from under the bed, and she takes pictures and then runs out, and they use that to malign the gospel and everything else. And then they also talk about on the side of, but also because somehow if you're alone with another woman, you're definitely going to have sex at some point. And so somehow sexual purity is not being alone with a woman, which is, by the way, if that is truly your problem, you're called a predator. If you cannot be alone with another woman and not in some way it becomes sexual, you're a predator. But also that is inherently demeaning towards women. What it means is women can never have co-equal relationships of power and authority with a man in those situations if they can't be. Right? So let's be honest about all of that together.
Yeah. Now, that doesn't necessarily line up with the part that we were talking about with women coming to men for counseling, because in that scenario, the women coming to the man is coming in a submission already because they are coming to
in
ask
a matter
for
of authority. That's right. Yeah.
And so I don't want to insinuate.
We're not saying those aren't apples to apples, but it is all part of the same schema, right? The same way that happens, to where you come through and this person has authority and moves through, and how you There's hierarchies, there's dynamics that are supposed to be ingrained.
Yeah.
And the abuse happens because of those.
Yeah, and that's rampant. I grew up with the True Love Waits movement. With all of this idea,
purity rings and roses plucked and all that.
Yeah, for sure. And part of that culture and idea was that it's on the women. Every problem that a guy has, it's because of women, and
women are responsible for men's lusting or men's,
which is, I remember those words being said to me, like, like it was, dress modestly because you don't want to tempt your brothers.
That's right. Yeah.
In Christ. And I grew up believing that, and it was ingrained in my upbringing. And, it's still, it's one of those things it's so ingrained that you almost, it's subconscious at this point.
Yes.
And so that's something that I've really tried to do a lot of work on, and understanding my thoughts around women, and understanding that it's not their responsibility to be concerned about what I'm looking at or what I'm doing. You know, like, that's on me. That's on it's not their responsibility for what a guy thinks, right? Like, it's a man's responsibility to approach and treat people with respect, or anybody. Let's just say anybody. I want to say man, woman. We're not. I don't want to necessarily put a gender on that statement, but it's everybody is equal and should be treated as such, and there's no one way that people. I'm rambling, so I'm probably going to end up cutting
I think, and for listeners, right, this is, right, it's not apples to apples, but even that schema that comes to where, sexual purity is a woman's responsibility, part of that becomes all of that of True Love Waits and being modest and everything, but it very easily then translates to when a man sexually abuses, when a man rapes a woman, it's the woman's fault. Like, what were you wearing? Where were you? Like, somehow, again, if no matter what a woman is wearing, if a woman, a most beautiful woman in the world, walks in naked, and that man cannot help from sexually, physically attacking, those are called sexual predators.
Right.
It's not just like a casual. So these things move together. So this is, right, there are two avenues that this meets with Billy Graham, because some may be wondering, didn't we start with Billy Graham and Nixon? One is that we need to admit, if we're going to talk about the ways that religious leaders disappoint us in what we do, which we're going to get back to in just a second, we have to admit we cannot talk around the ways that has happened in horrible, disgusting, abominable ways throughout religious communities throughout time, but certainly what we've seen lately, and that matters for people. So we don't dismiss that and not talk about it.
Right.
But there's also the dilemma that we come back to, Graham, of when I said my worry of this kind of dispensational end of the world stuff is it's a schema that's built in, that is ripe for, that maybe encourages these other things that are very real world issues that affects how we treat people, and oppression and power and movement. And I think it is similar to True Love Waits, women don't tempt your men, to it's a woman's fault that she was raped. That it doesn't immediately flow. Everyone who says, right, that women need to be modest doesn't mean that they're always victim blaming. It's not automatic.
Right.
But you see how it allows easily for that, maybe unconsciously for it.
Yeah.
I think this is part of the issue that I worry about with the end of the world stuff. It's just so often, it's not coincidental that racism and anti-Semitism and misogyny and all of this are moved together.
Yeah.
But then, so I mean, there's no fixing this. This is another one that we've talked about before. There's no like, so if you out there have experienced this and there's someone who has been, that has been abusive, physically, sexually, spiritually towards you, I don't know an answer there.
Yeah.
Just simply because of personal experience. As we talked before, I work quite often with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and there's some experiences there with that community in different ways. There's no like, but don't worry, Christianity is still here. That's a hard hurdle.
Yeah.
I just hope and literally pray that there are people of goodwill and compassion that help those incredibly strong people who wrestle and deal with that the rest of their lives, that they can come to a point of health and healing with that. Not necessarily like, well, then now go to church. It's another part.
Right.
But even when you see these communities where the religious leader, the preacher or whatever is embezzling, right, that it's a consensual affair, right, that, or even that we'll talk about in later times, the way that a lot of Christian communities talk about through politics, when they think they're talking about politics, talk about other human beings and explicitly dehumanize them in ways that you find morally appalling. How do you say, well, yeah, but that's that person? It's not as easy as it's that person, but everyone else is okay.
Right.
Especially if you are a part of, experience a community that, yeah, it's that person, but they're hearing all this and they stand up and cheer, right? In your example before, we don't have easy answers in that, but we need to acknowledge that and still say we acknowledge it, but we still have faith. But there's some communities that I believe are rotten communities.
Yeah.
Even if it hurts, and sometimes it's getting as far away from that as you can.
Yeah,
but,
and just hope and pray that people who are in a community like that there can be change. And I have seen change happen in communities like that before, where there was toxic leadership and that leadership was ran off or left for whatever reason, and healing was done.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it takes a lot longer to build something than it does to tear it down.
It takes a lot of time and a lot of difficult conversations and looks and that's
so
right.
You know, hopefully if you find yourself in that situation, don't give up. You know, or do. I don't know. I don't have.
It depends on what giving up. Not of the church of Christianity, of how that works.
Don't give up on yourself. Don't.
That's right.
You know that. You know, we've said it many times on this podcast. We're all equally made. Right. We're all equally loved, and hopefully you can find a place where you can get some healing and get some you know, some examples of love or something. That's
right.
You know,
and this is another one we always do this at the end, and we really do mean it. If this is a big topic, right? It was a starting off point. We talked about a lot of stuff, but that's okay, right? We're admitting the dirty realities of all of this and what we do with it and how we go. If there's something that you think that we have missed, that we've said that was insensitive or outright wrong, or that because of your perspective and understanding, we want to hear that, right? That's the way it works. It's the way it should work with all of us. So we want to make sure we have that. The email address is
babyjesuspodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah. So if you have some issues, some concerns, you just have thoughts from your own experiences of this, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, we're definitely always trying to learn and see new perspectives on this, because we can talk about this all day long. I've never experienced spiritual abuse in the church. I've never been a victim of that, so I can't speak from that perspective. And it would, if you have and you want to share, I mean, we would. Love to hear
it's
that.
a really helpful way for all of us to learn and to grow.
We certainly want to represent.
It works absolutely.
You know, all aspects of what this can be.
Yeah. And this is toward the end, right? A part of me wants to be, the other old part of me wants to be like, well, hang in there. Right, people. I don't know that that's the answer. I don't think it's. Sometimes don't hang in there. Sometimes leave that community. But we have to admit that this is a reality of the world. That people disappoint and institutions disappoint, and sometimes not in just casual ways. in deeply hurtful, painful, long-lasting ways. But we hope that people have healing and love and can find ways through that.
Yeah. Well, we talked about a lot of things today. We kind of meandered a little bit, but we do hope that you found today's conversation meaningful. As we said before, we would love to hear from you. If you have questions, if you have ideas about topics you'd like us to cover, or just comments or perspective about anything we've talked about, you can reach out to us at babyjesuspodcast@gmail.com, and we hope to hear from you, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, everyone.